Everybody, Jason here from Murideo, and in today's webcast, I have a special guest, Ryan from Diversified Video Solutions. Ryan, how are you?
I'm doing good. How about yourself, Jason?
I'm awesome, man. Thank you so much for joining me today. And we do have several people on the chat box here. So if you guys have any questions while we're going through the presentation and talking about some of Ryan's test patterns and whatnot, feel free to type those questions into the question box. I'll do my best to get to them right away. And if not, we'll leave a little bit of time at the end. So Ryan, Diversified Video Solutions. I'll tell you a quick story about how I found you, and we'll just kind of go from there. It was really interesting. As a calibrator, I see a lot of TVs, and in 2016, that seemed to be a good year to buy an OLED. They've worked out some of the kinks, it seems like, especially with LG. Actually, they may have been the only ones doing it back then. But I had bought a C7, knowing some of the shortcomings for the C6 and the 6 series in general. And there was issues with the color management and some other things, but I finally get a 7, and I'm like, okay, spent my own money on it, went to Best Buy and did the whole thing. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, we're going to calibrate SDR. That's no problem. We've been doing that for a million years. When it came to the HDR, it was different. And instead of using percentages or IRE levels in SDR, we were seeing code values. And at the time, it was new and didn't really know how that worked and what that was all about. And the Dolby Vision was even stranger. And I'm sitting here with a test pattern generator, and I'm going, how in the world am I going to do this? And doing a little bit of research, I came across your disc. And that disc was so helpful because specifically for the C7, it already had the HDR patterns in it and the Dolby Vision patterns in it. So I'm sitting here going, wow, this is awesome. This is exactly what I was looking for. So that's how I found you. And if I'm not mistaken, that was disc 1, right?
Yeah, they kind of blend together. I know
Sure.
when one was first created, it was a task in itself just getting that off the ground.
Yeah.
I know we had the digital files available, so I would say that we went to code values at that point, but definitely within version 2. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, and so thank you, because that was like a whole year or 18 months of me calibrating TVs for clients and things like that, where otherwise I would have been really stuck, especially with the HDR and Dolby Vision. So thank you for making that. That was super helpful to a lot of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so Ryan, let's talk about this is the first time I've had you on, so let's talk a little bit about your background and how we got here. I know that you work for an integrator as your full-time job, yes?
Yes, absolutely.
Cool.
So yeah, so I've been in the AV industry going on 21, 22 plus years now.
Nice.
Yeah, so it's I've always had a passion for AV, mostly the V. I love video.
Sure.
I'm a video nut. Always been. So within that time frame, I've dabbled in a couple of different things, right? So I owned an integration business in the mid 2000s, HDI, Home Technology Innovations, and had that for about 4 years. It was great. That's when I kind of started getting into setting up displays, flat panel. Well, yeah, I guess flat panels at that point, maybe rear projection. But at that point, I started getting into more of the video side of things. But something that sticks out in my mind, in my background, as I'm a project manager, so I manage a lot of these $1 million projects. I get to mess with all these different types of technologies, video walls, projection, 2-piece, all that, types of things. But for my personal self, I wanted to get into more on the video calibration side, and I would say that probably started like around the 2007-ish, 2008 timeframe. So that's kind of when this all started.
Yeah, and at that time, when you got into, like, actually, I should ask it a different way. What got you into making the actual test patterns like you do now? Like, there had to be a moment in time where you had a kind of a light bulb moment, and you probably said to yourself, like, wow, I should probably make this myself. So how did that all happen?
No, absolutely. So obviously with the forums, right, we're all on them. I think at that point in time, obviously the AVS, the HD709 disc was prevalent. There's a lot of folks that still use it to this day. Great free tool. It came with a lot of workthroughs and workflows and what have you. Obviously, Connect Ted. Ted, I don't want to butcher his last name, Aspiotis, I believe it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, he made a lot of great test patterns. So those were inspirations, right? So I don't know, and not a lot of people, unless you're on the forums, really remember this, but I actually came out with a SDR disc. It was actually RM's advanced calibration disc, and this wasn't anything to try and you know, supersede the 709 disc or things that have already been created. But I specifically made mine because of Panasonic VT50. Do you remember that that panel?
Absolutely. Awesome
It
TV.
was probably one of the most aggressive ABLs on the planet. And you know, on the forums at that time, I was thinking to myself, okay, I have these, you know, different pattern generators I could utilize, you know, all these different patterns. Well, it was my life's duty, I felt, to go in and try and make a test pattern that I could actually calibrate my own display. So I did it for my own personal use.
Yeah,
And
sure.
I made it as an available tool on the forum for free. And at that point, you know, I made a couple of revisions, but that right there was the very start of pattern creation. You know, I talked with a lot of different folks, some that aren't on the forums anymore. And about, you know, at that point, I wanted to learn how to build something that was referenced. You know, one of the biggest I still stick to today is, what's the point of making something unless it's referenced, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're just going in circles. You're lying to yourself. You know, you want to have something. So that's, to answer your question, that was the very, very beginning. So obviously, that was a little bit of ways before HDR, you know, came into play. But that was the first time that I dabbled in pattern creation.
Isn't it funny that, you know, the more people I talk to, especially over the last 5 years or so, it's funny how a lot of us got into this because of this being a hobby and us being sort of enthusiasts when it comes to this stuff. I remember, and I know you'll appreciate this, I was working for a chain called Sound Advice in Florida, 27 stores, tons of success through the 80s and 90s. And I was working there as a 19, 20-year-old kid. And I always was more into audio. I had always owned a camera, and I liked video, but I was always an audio guy. So I'm working at Sound Advice as a young guy doing car audio at the time. And but I still like really cool TVs and really cool home theater systems and 2-channel systems, especially 2-channel systems. I grew up with 2-channel systems. So I walk into the store one day. It was kind of early before the store opened, and one of my coworkers who worked on the home theater side, he's in one of the dark rooms with a blanket over a Mitsubishi Diamond Series, you know, 3-gun CRT rear projection TV, and he's looking at test patterns. And I'm like, what in the world are you doing under there? Like, you look like an NFL referee or something. Like, what's going on? He's like, well, I'm calibrating this TV. And I'm like, what are you talking about? What does that mean? He said, well, we're making sure the levels are correct and the white balance is correct. And that triggered something in me. I was like, white balance, that's what I do to my camera. So this is starting to make sense now. And that was the, I want to say that was the Avia disc. Do you remember that one?
Yeah.
In the early 2000s. I still have it. It has a crack in it, but I still have it for nostalgia reasons. But yeah, I just always find that really interesting that a lot of us get into this because of the enthusiasm that we just have for the industry. There actually a couple questions came in already from actually from Tom. Tom says, I think he's giving you a nice big compliment. Yep, Tom says, nice to see you, Ryan. Been using your test patterns for some time now. Always wondered who their creator is and what he looks like, and now I know. So warm welcome from, he's in Warsaw, Poland. So there you go.
Yeah,
cool,
yeah,
cool.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
so Ryan, where are we today with test patterns? Like, what is the need to have, let's say, a disc like yours versus having like what we have in Murideo as a test pattern generator? Like, what do your test patterns do more than what our test patterns do in the generator?
It's simple, right? They both offer reference. The difference is price. So one of the things that I've always pride myself on doing, and even now, is making something that's reference attainable for the enthusiast or professional, and they can be utilized. Now, obviously, you know, some of my customers come in, and sometimes it's a little cumbersome, say, to use the digital file, say, versus disc. But I also have to put in and factor in price point, right? So you know, I don't want to discuss price, but we obviously know, though a great investment to say buy a Gen 6 or a Gen 7, you know, $25 for a download or $35 for a disc is relatively inexpensive.
Yeah.
So I would say what it does, they're going to do the same things. Now, obviously, with a test pattern generator, you're going to have the flexibility, especially when it comes to putting, squares on a black background, right?
Sure.
With your generator, you can make any patch size, different types of APLs, and that's what you're really paying for is that reference and that uniqueness and that ability, especially with the Gen 7, which is phenomenal, by the way.
Thank you. Nice piece, yeah.
It's super flexible. But if you go to my patterns, I try to at least incorporate a lot of what's utilized. So if you get super custom, which I do provide, I've had customers come to me before and say, hey, look, I'm really trying to do something unique and specific just to this particular display or what have you, and I've created something custom. But for the most part, my patch sizes, which I try to offer a multitude of, I kind of hit that sweet spot. So, but yeah, so I mean, the basic difference is price. Just making something attainable for the people. I started this as a hobby. I'm still an enthusiast. At heart, I love doing this. It's a small niche. This group of people. It's like banding together. And just trying to make everyone have the best possible experience they can with whatever their setup and whatever their budget is.
It kind of sounds like something I've said for a long time is we're trying to turn the average person into a video file. And how do you do that if you don't have something affordable that they can use for test patterns, which you definitely provide? And there are some light meters out there now that aren't terribly expensive. I mean, you can get into a disk or some files like yours. You can get it into a test pattern generator. I'm sorry, into a light meter for under $300 nowadays. That does pretty well for most applications. So, once we get people like what you and I see on the forums, we get those folks involved and they start doing their own thing and they're passionate about it, of course. And then, their friend comes over and says, wow, we have the same TV. Mine doesn't look like that. What'd you do? And, then that guy turns his neighbor into a video file and just, the cycle continues. The one thing that just kills me is I know you do a lot of commercial stuff. One thing that kills me is going to like an airport or a bar and all the TVs look different, or a video wall, and none of them match. And I always say to myself, I'm like, you spend all this time doing this beautiful installation. Everything's hidden. It's really nice. This video wall looks great. There's barely any seams and they're all level. It's like you went through all the care of doing that, and then the panels aren't matched. And I'm thinking to myself, you could take a disk or file on a thumb drive and pop it into whatever that video processor is, and you can at least match the video walls, at least by eye. And you can do that with something as simple as some of your files that are extremely affordable. Is that kind of stuff that you're seeing too in your end of the world?
No, I do. 100%, absolutely. So I really think it depends on the integrator. I know for us, we have all the calibration tools, even though
you guys, for sure.
I'm not physically out there doing, these setups, but my team have some really good technicians. And we deal with companies like Planar. They do a lot of displays. Whether it's a 2x2 or a massive wall. I think one of the things that a lot of folks are running into is probably QC. It's been really lax. So, and as well as I do. So I mean, if you're taking say 4 panels, right? Say they're out of the same batch even. They're going to unbox it, they're going to put it up, and all 4 of them are a different color temperature.
Always.
And no matter what, I mean, you could sit there and you try to do the best you can, even by eye. And so I think a lot of that's going to change, though. I think that was more prevalent with LCD with LED backlight. I think once you start the true direct lit LED panels, I think that's some of that's going to go away. But back to your point. If you're coming into an airport or you're going to a mall or you're seeing these big venues and you're like, wow, that's amazing. However, I can see that it's not balanced, but we're a small niche, right? We're the 1%ers. The average person's going to just walk by with their suitcase in the airport and say, oh, wow, yeah, I see that, whatever they're saying.
Yeah, the airport situation, I totally agree. I'm in airports all the time, and you are just kind of rushed through. But I'll notice stuff, but you're right. Like most people are head down, or they're just trying to get to the next gate as fast as possible. But what really gets me, and where my friends love and hate me all at the same time, is if we are out somewhere watching a game, or one of my most infamous examples is here where the Tampa Bay Lightning play. the jumbotron above the ice is straight up purple. Like it is straight up purple. So we go to hockey, hockey games, and I'm like nudging my friends, and I'm like, look, now look at the ice. Now look at the screen. What do you see? And they're like, stop doing this. That's all you can see once somebody points it out. But I feel like that's kind of our job too, is to point some of that stuff out.
Yeah, I'm guilty of it too, Jason. I mean,
it's hard not to be.
There's a couple of commercial theaters out there that just kill me. Now, obviously, even though I have a phenomenal 110-inch screen, 2-piece setup, there's still nothing like, going into a massive, cinema.
Yeah.
But, when you're paying the type of money to go see something like that, and you're like, the color's a little off, or, it doesn't look as good as quite as it could, I'm with you.
The last movie I saw in the theater was The Joker. And we were at a big Cinemaplex in Ohio. My girlfriend's family's from Ohio, so we were up there visiting, and let's go see Joker while we're here. And we go to see it. It's in one of their nicest theaters, probably might even be their nicest and biggest one. And the green exit light that was down by the door was shining onto the bottom corner of the screen. And I could not get it out of my head. And I sort of had to force myself to watch the movie. But, that's something, environment, right? But like, I know what you're saying about the image itself. You're looking at it and you're like, wow, I'm in a professional theater and the blacks are crushed. Like what? This isn't right. And then again, when you point that stuff out to whoever you're with, they're like, oh yeah. And then they might notice it at home, and
she's nudging you like, can you just watch the movie?
Yeah. Well, it's funny now because she's played this game with me for a decade now, and we were somewhere, and she points at the TV and she goes, "Man, that TV looks blue, doesn't it?" And I was like, "I love you all over again." Like,
we were cut from the same cloth, my friend. I'm the same way. When my wife goes out, even without me, and she'll point something out, and her friends are like, "What are you talking? How do you even know this? What does that even mean?"
Yeah. Well, when you're like us and you look at thousands of panels a year, it does become just kind of second nature. That's funny. But you mentioned something before, and I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page, because this is sort of a confusing topic, and there's a lot of information out there, and it's really easy to get messed up. You mentioned the ABL of, I think you said the Panasonic Plasma. So let's talk about that a little bit, because there's conflicting information about, like, when you're calibrating SDR and OLED and using a 10% window versus a plasma, should you be using the constant APL patterns? So maybe let's just kind of clear that up for everybody, and let's start with what APL and ABL mean.
Yeah. So you have an ABL, which is the auto brightness limiter, or and that technically keeps legacy plasma, OLED, within the confines of its ability, power supplies, and things like that. You want to keep things at bay. So with current OLED, not as bad as what some of the legacy plasmas were. You'll see things dim as there's a lot of white content on the screen versus black. And then the APL, the average picture level, we utilize that in patterns to kind of simulate real life situations on screen. So when I initially started working with the folks on ABS forums back when this was just SDR and just dealing with ABL on the VT50, for example, what folks were finding out is, there was a lot of back and forth. Well, let's take a black background and let's put like a teeny little box on there. And noticed with that little teeny box, it would read something bizarro bright, 150, whatever the nit level was. But you noticed as you expanded and made the white square a little larger, it would actually drop down, and the ABL would start to kick in. Then if you went full screen, you were almost cutting your light output in half. So a lot of folks, and I'm not taking credit for figuring this out. I just wanted to help something combat it. So a lot of these folks, like the creator of the fork and the HCFR software, they did a lot of work on trying to figure out how to make patterns work for this. And there's a lot of discussions. Well, let's put actual still frame of a movie content on the screen with a pattern. We tried that, and then we started doing, well, let's take the background and make it at a certain level, right? And then have the patch that you're measuring, and then have that background kind of change as the patterns change to kind of give you a emulated real life scenario to balance, because at that point white patterns on a black background wouldn't suffice. Now,
Right.
however, on the flip side of that, there are a lot of industry professionals that say a particular white patch on a black background will also suffice. And it's a lot of conflicting. I think it's more or less, let's provide all the tools, let's provide all the patches, let's go ahead and take some measurements and kind of see where we are with this, and then go with what works best. And it wasn't always, it didn't work across all display types. It
Sure.
would, right? So what would work for one wouldn't work for the other.
Sure.
Now moving to OLED, we did notice that it wasn't necessarily needed to have an APL pattern per se. It's that average size of a true 10% on a black background seemed to emulate best, at least for the LG series of panels, right? And,
Sure.
LG panels went into the Sony, so that kind of worked. So
Right.
that's how that all kind of came about.
I used to tell people, and check me here if I say this wrong, but I would tell people that we use those APL patterns to kind of trick the TV into not the ABL, to trick the TV so that the ABL doesn't kick in. Is that a fair kind of way to describe it if you're being real simple?
Kind of, sort of, in a way. It's always there. It's just how aggressive the software runs it, but it's always there in a sense. I think, and not to kind of jump off topic, but I think that came into play more so with local dimming displays.
Yes.
And things. I know there was a very big, still ongoing discussion. Do you have the local dimming turned off when you're calibrating? Do you have it turned on? So there's a lot of back and forth with that, and I think it was a very different time, starting like in the mid to late 2000s. Going into 2010, 12, 13, 14, where all these different manufacturers, Panasonic, Sony, LG, everyone was adding in all these different types of things to make dynamic their displays pop and sell. But as well as I do, you're turning a majority of these things off. But I mean, there were still these things in play, like local dimming, dealing with plasmas at the time, and OLEDs now with with ABL, and with all these different respected industry professionals that have been doing this for decades, right? They have their own spiel. This is why, and this is why. So it does make it confusing, and I don't think one's right and one's wrong. I really think that it just really depends on your setup. I think it really depends on your display. It's going to depend on your meter. It's going to depend on your pattern generator. And there's a lot of folks. I was talking with a customer the other day. Ryan, I have my HTPC, with a HD Fury 2 in line, and I'm trying to trick the metadata to make this work. So there's so many people out there, which is awesome, trying to find these different ways to make ultimately what everyone wants. They want the best that their display could do.
Sure.
Regardless if it's a low budget flat panel all the way up to a $10 million or $10,000 projector, 20 what have you.
Yeah, sure. Tom had another question. He says, have you considered making an app for Android Tizen WebOS TVs with some of the test patterns?
I have. That's actually been on one of my burners for quite some time. It's actually just pulling the trigger to be able to offer that. That's actually a great question. I know that it was somewhat implemented with the folks now Portrait Displays, but I think it was with Calman at the time, with SpectraCal. They had something where they had the Forge pattern generator, I believe, that they added in there. I think the problem, and I looked into this, so obviously having somewhat of a coding background, implementing something like that, I don't want to say would be simplistic, definitely doable. I think the reference level would have to be there. I think you would have to figure out You know, if you were to do Android, what Android phones? I think it would something, and I'm an Android phone at heart, you know,
Yeah,
but
same here. Yeah.
but if you were to make it for iOS, I think that it would probably work a little more seamlessly, just because you're dealing with one iOS with one phone. But when then you hop onto the Android side, there's so many flavors, and
Totally.
you know, you know, you make something, you know, I'm going to output, you know, 50% red at 50% saturation. You're obviously going to expect that output.
Right, right.
And that's not always able, that's not an easy task when you have, you know, a multitude of devices that are out there. But it's not out of the question. There's definitely, you know, Jason, you and I were talking before we hopped on and went live. There's a lot of things that I'm going to be working on going into 2022.
Very cool.
That you know, you're going to see some things. So maybe an app is in the future. There's definitely, even though disc mediums are kind of phasing out somewhat, there's still talks of possibly another disc that's all encompassing. We had talked about my website is definitely in the process of the upgrade. There's some interaction on there. There's going to be an open forum and chat to kind of talk.
Cool.
So yeah, there's definitely a lot of things in the pipeline. But yeah, but back to Tom's question, it's definitely not out of the question.
Good, good. Something I've always kind of wondered myself, and you know, kind of speaking to your point about, you know, a lot of phones being different, you don't really know what's going to come out. How do we know whether somebody has a disc, or maybe they're putting a thumb drive into their media streamer or Blu-ray player? How do we know to trust the output of that Blu-ray player or that media streamer? Is it sort of a crapshoot, or are they all kind of the same, or what are you saying?
So that's a great question, and I know folks like I had mentioned Ted earlier. You know, those guys have done some great work on testing outputs, you know, with different softwares and machines. You know, testing. You know, in the past we always relied on things. So if it's a disc, I know my disc is referenced, but as soon as you pop it into whatever player, is that player outputting?
Who knows? Yeah, exactly.
Via HDMI, you have a relatively good chance. Obviously, a lot of folks in our little niche market, you know, dealt with Oppo, right?
Right.
You know,
Sure.
obviously, a great reference player.
I sold 2 of them.
Yeah, right. Panasonic's, a lot of them had, you know, great work with outputting, especially 420. I think where you come into play, where it's kind of a crapshoot, you know, as you had mentioned, is when you're dealing with home theater PC.
Oh yeah, video cards.
It's really hard now. You know, I know there's, you know, a lot of different open source softwares out there that you put in place to use as your media player to be able to tweak. I mean, anything that I could offer as advice is, you know, try to have something that's a known reference.
Yes.
Kind of take a couple of different measurements, and then if they're kind of aligning, you know, you're in the ballpark, right? But you know, there's also different types of tolerances. You know, if you have a I1 display 3, like you said, at that price point for the average person, if you're taking measurements, you're taking readings. You know, it's going to be plus or minus. You know, it's not going to be 100% reference, but it's going to be really, really close.
Be close, very close.
You're going to have those types of variances. You know, with you know, your home theater PC or your different media players, whether you have a Roku or an Apple TV, and they all vary, and all of them have settings within themselves. So one of the great things about how, I guess we can start calling it the legacy, you know, quote unquote legacy setup, where, you know, you would have your Ultra HD player, right, or your Blu-ray player, nonetheless, a disc connected directly to your display or projector. You knew that entire line is going to be your setup for watching said movies. So you put this calibration disc in, regardless if you're outputting wrong, right, or indifferent, you're going to calibrate that all out through this disc. That's not necessarily the case now with, say, new players, and that's not putting anybody down. It's just that data is not there to know right or wrong, right? And then also with digital files, you know, a lot of my customers will, you know, place it onto a flash drive and plug it directly into their display. And you know, I'd say at that point, you know, take multiple measurements, you know, and you don't calibrate once. Knowing that we interact with,
me.
just calibrate once. We do it for fun. We do it to learn. We do it to figure different things out. So let's not kid ourselves. You're not going to go in there and just take one measurement and you're like, well, you know what? This is perfect. I'm good.
Yeah, no
You're
way.
going to go in there and I tell all of my customers, you know, some of them get frustrated. I'm like, look, you know, if you want to take something, especially with HDR, I mean, and HDR's been out for how many years now? And it's still learning curves for everybody, you know, and it's don't take this on as something you want to just try and get knocked out. Yeah, everyone wants to have their display look the best that it can, but take it, have fun, learn, you know, and at the end of the day, you can hit the reset button.
I've said that so many times. I'm like, you're not going to break anything. Press reset, start over. It's not like we're doing this stuff in service menus anymore, where that's where I started, and you could break the TV, you know, and I read on the forums. I mean, gosh, how many times on the forums have you seen that Samsung HDMI calibration failure inside the service menu?
I
you have to have a specific checkerboard pattern to fix it, even if you could fix it. And, you know, God forbid you call the Samsung, you know, hotline, they send somebody out, they go to the service menu, they see that it failed, and they go, sorry, you were in here monkeying around, no warranty. So luckily those days are kind of over, and you're exactly right, man. Hit that picture reset button, start over. And I always tell people too, this is like learning how to play guitar. You don't just take one lesson and all of a sudden you're Jimi Hendrix. You have to practice and you have to play around. Yeah. So I love that. Another thing that I've kind of wondered myself with the different TV manufacturers, if I take one of your files on a thumb drive and I pop it into, I'm not picking on anybody, I'm just using names here. But if I pop one of the files on a thumb drive and pop it into an LG TV versus a Sony TV versus a Samsung TV, are they processing anything differently in that point? So I guess I should ask it like this. If I take a test pattern that's video level 16 to 235 and I put that on the thumb drive and pop it into the TV, does the TV still see that as 16 to 235, or does it try to put it back to 0 to 255, or do different manufacturers do it differently? What are you saying?
So ultimately it's going to go out to an analog level at a whatever range specified. I mean, that's just the electronics themselves.
Sure.
The question we're asking right now, and more so with HDR, is what's happening with that pattern.
Exactly.
I think that everyone is pulling their hair out because it's going to run differently across whatever manufacturer, right? So if we take, say, you know, a pattern 16 to 235, and well, let's do HDR. So let's go for 1,000 nit. You know, so we're like the 75% mark. If you're on an LG and say you're pushing, let's talk about realistic numbers on current models at say 700 nit, right? Then you say take a Samsung that has the ability to say do 2,000 nit, and then say we're on a Sony that's at 1,500 nit or what have you. So in the legacy SDR days, you would be able to put this test pattern in every single model, and you would see, say, flashing bars on a contrast pattern, and you would be able to go into the menu and you'd be able to adjust your contrast, and you'd be able to say, you know what, this is it. This is what my TV can do, and that obviously is going to be different on every display. Well, now the challenge with HDR is what's happening with the tone mapping. What's going on? So if I have a test pattern that say has 1,000 nit, is this display, is it reading this metadata? Is it interpreting this metadata properly? And not to get into another subject, but one of the biggest things that I tell my customers with my sets of patterns, regardless if it's Dolby Vision, HLG, HDR10, it's exposing anomalies. It's exposing how is my display with this specific set of metadata, how is it interpreting this test pattern? What's going on behind the scenes? Because a lot of folks will go in, they start adjusting contrast, and there's still a little bit of controversy going back and forth. It also depends on manufacturer. Should I adjust contrast with HDR? Are you messing with the potential tone mapping? Are you degrading the quality? Trying to figure something out? And the answer is, yeah, possibly.
Yeah, sure.
But you really need to put that in there to see what's going on. So I know for a long time, I don't think it's the case anymore, but I know with earlier Samsung displays, when HDR was kind of in a real infancy stage, I know a lot of metadata was just being stripped and
Yes.
it was just doing its own thing. It was implementing its own metadata. And one of the great things about my test patterns is if you talk to, say, someone who's in pre and post production who actually makes and grades content, they actually grade it to a level. Well, the difference between grading it to a level and creating a test pattern with a specific set of metadata is my clipping pattern, say, for example, for white clipping, it actually goes all the way up to 10,000 nit in bars.
Right.
But what's happening is my metadata stops and clips it at 1,000 nit. But what I was noticing, and this was, in the conception stage, is on the Samsung displays, I was actually getting flashing bars at like the 2,000 and 3,000 nit. And I'm thinking to myself, how is this happening?
How?
And I was still learning, because I was like, well, my metadata is telling the display, stop. You can't do anything past here. But what was happening was Samsung was stripping said metadata and then looking at the entire picture level and then grading it on its own. So, so these are all different types of things, different types of, methodologies that each of these companies are using to try and do, and, what they think makes their display or, the device looks best. Yeah.
One of the things that we continue to teach in the ISF course, and I know Greg talks about this a lot in the PVA course, but you can calibrate the display, that's all fine and dandy, but we're really there to calibrate the system. So something that I've always done, and feel free to people who are listening to this, feel free to steal this, but it's really simple. We calibrate the display, and you've got your, let's just use black level, white level as an easy example. You calibrate the display, those two levels are correct, and you take a disc like yours, you pop it into the Blu-ray player, and now the blacks are crushed and the whites are clipped. You go, wait a second, according to my generator, that stuff wasn't happening, but it is happening on the disc. The common denominator between the disc and the TV is the player. So we use a disc like yours, pop it in, adjust the brightness and contrast in the player menu, assuming it has it. Now the disc, the player, and the TV all agree. Now your black level's where it should be, now your contrast is where it should be. And that's really, like, to me, that's the fundamental reason, to me, that's the number one reason why you should have a disc like that.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. So that's always been a thing, is calibrating the entire chain, right? So I think one of the benefits to, say, my customer, say, versus, say, like, any company that sells a pattern generator, is it is, I guess, more of a reference setup. If you were to have a pattern generator connected, directly to the display, calibrate it, and then come back, use my test disc as a way to kind of reference, make, a few adjustments. But if the money is not there, if you can't physically afford the pattern generator, you can still take my test disc, place it inside the player, and still calibrate that entire chain. You won't have the flexibility, right, as a generator, but you could at least calibrate grayscale, color, set up, all those different aspects from that. But yeah, at the end of the day, you need to have the entire chain calibrated 100%.
And as much as I love the Oppo, again, I have two of them still, but almost every single one I've run into, not all of them, but a lot of them, I should say, I've got to bring the black level up one click. I just, on the Oppo, I feel like I have to do that all the time. So again, I'm watching a movie and it's got crushed blacks, but my TV's calibrated. So it's always been kind of weird. But yeah, I know some of the Panasonics have individual controls for things like brightness, contrast, color, tint. The Oppos do. The nicer Sonys do. I know I'm forgetting a couple. Can you think of any other players that have adjustments that you can use your disc with besides Panasonic, Oppo, Sony? I know I've got to be missing a couple, maybe.
Yeah, possibly some out there. I mean, you just nailed the major players. I mean, there's a couple of non streamlined, more known to the public players that are out there. Because I think Oppo shared, they utilize their internals with another couple of companies, I believe.
They've done a couple. Yeah, I think maybe Lexicon may have used.
Lexicon used,
that Electrocampion from France. I know they use some of that stuff too.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, in those two cases, especially those two cases, I mean, we're talking like high end, thousands of dollars.
Denon, I don't know.
Yeah. They're still. And Pioneer Elite has a new one too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Good, 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 good. So we have a little bit of time left. I wanted to take a moment to kind of look at some of the test patterns.
Yeah.
Just a shameless plug, we have a lot of your test patterns in the Murideo 7G generator, and there's been a couple of those that I've taken those files and even installed them on my 6G because I found them so useful. So bear with me just a moment. I'm going to share my screen.
Sure.
And then we'll take a look at the Murideo website because, and just by the way, guys, on the Murideo website, you can see a handful of the test patterns that are on the 7G with descriptions and with examples of each one. So Ryan, can you see my screen right now?
I can.
Okay, cool. So and if you guys watching or listening live or watching live, I should say, if you can't see my screen, let me know, but I am sharing it right now. So if you go to the Murideo website, murideo.com, come over to the resources tab, come down to test pattern library, scroll down, and then you'll come to this bottom part where it shows you all the different test patterns. So the FPGA patterns, the ones that we've loaded in straight into the FPGA chip, some patterns from ISF, Greg from PVA has some patterns here as well. Here's your patterns, the DVS HDR patterns. So I'll point out one that I love and I use it all the time, and we can talk a little bit about why this is such a cool pattern and what its use cases are. But if we scroll down right here, the first time I saw this pattern, I was like, oh my gosh, that's genius. Why hasn't anyone made one like this before? So it is, oh gosh, of course, now I can't find it right away. It is the multicolored, it looks like a, I should say a wave of all the primary and secondary colors.
Yeah.
Oh man, of course it's not coming up right away. It always happens.
It does. Only when you're live.
I know, right? Where was it? I could have sworn it was, I'll tell you what, we'll worry about that one later.
No worries.
Let's look at just some of the simple ones that are here on the Murideo site at least. So this is a flashing black level pattern, correct?
That is correct.
And this one's in HDR. So when we start looking at some of these flashing bars, in SDR, it's easy, right? Like especially 8-bit normal SDR, the black level 16, we want that to blend in with the background. You want to see 17 first. But there's some different numbers here. So we're looking at rectangle 28 or bar 28 all the way up to bar 156. So if somebody's normally used to calibrating SDR at 8-bit and they see a pattern like this in HDR, what the heck are they looking for?
Right. So we still have block 64. So the number difference in the integers is the fact that this is showing that it's 10-bit versus 8-bit. So you can divide all these by 4 and actually see. So if you were to take 64 and divide that down by 4, you would have 16. So that right there is basically showing you that's your reference black. Now,
right.
One thing that I've talked to all my customers, you're not going to get the granularity out of this in HDR versus SDR. And the reason being is because of tone mapping.
Sure.
So what I advise is utilize this pattern in a couple of different ways, right? So perfect example, and I can talk about this because this has already been exposed and it's already there's already a workaround. So the projector that I currently have in my projector, the JVC, right? So the tone mapping that was implemented in this particular projector on this test pattern, everything was red.
Oh wow.
There was a red overcast across the whole entire thing. So you can utilize this not just for a black clipping purpose. You could utilize to see if there's contaminants at this level. You should have a neutral gray all bands. Now, as you get down closer and closer, say down to 72, 76, here's the thing. It may be there, you may not see it flashing, but there is going to be a tone map that's going to grade from black all the way till you get up to maybe near like the 80, at least with these particular test patterns from what I can see. So you don't want to sit there and kill yourself. Now with SDR, you could turn off all the lights in your house or whatever your space is, and you can get right up to the screen and you could sit there and basically tick back and forth the brightness, plus or minus that 1 or 2 clicks. I can barely see it flashing. The black floor hasn't raised. This is where it needs to be. With HDR, this is a little bit more of, you can make an adjustment maybe plus or minus either way, but you're definitely going to need to be in an extremely dark environment. Sometimes, my customers will pause it to where the bars are up and they're not flashing. and they'll basically make this adjustment. But just remember, at the end of the day, you're essentially changing what the manufacturer's tone mapping is implementing on the lower end. So you don't want to, go crazy trying to expose something that doesn't need to be there. And, I would say the first couple of flashing bars past reference, they're probably there. It's just so dark that you can't see it. And that's just something that you're dealing with the internal tone mapping of said display.
Yeah, that's one thing I really like about 10-bit is you have more granularity down there, because there's been times where, one click down is crushed, one click up is gray, and you're like, man, I wish I had a click in between the two. And we never did until 10-bit. And I don't know, for those of you who are listening, especially if you're an enthusiast and a DIY kind of person, a really simple, like I'll call it a poor man's trick to doing exactly what you're saying. It sounds kind of funny, but trust me on this. If you take like the cardboard tube out of a paper towel roll or a toilet paper roll and get it right up on the screen to where you're like halfway in between black and the next level, which would be 68, like if you split those in half and the room is pitch black, like you can start to see it flashing even if you can't see it flashing from your seating position. So if you really want to geek out, next time you run out of paper towels, cut that tube in half and you can start looking at some things like this. So keeping to just at least the basics for some of the test patterns on the disc, let's look at sort of the same kind of thing, but for the contrast. And I think we can use, and tell me if we should use a different one, but I think we could use this one. That look good?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And there's multiples, so we can look at it in a few different ways. Which one, Ryan, out of the three do you think we should use to just kind of chat about it?
Either one. I mean, that's perfectly fine. So the reason why I offered a multitude is, and you should try and utilize all of these basic types of setup patterns because they all expose differently. Because of the average picture level of the actual pattern itself, right, is the tone mapping is going to be applied differently. So when you're making these adjustments, you could utilize this to see what's going on. So for example, if you were to put this up there, this is obviously all the way up to 10,000 nit. You should be able to put this on any display and see anything flashing. Especially with this particular pattern, it depends on what type of metadata is placed on it. I do have this pattern a couple of times within my sets with different metadata applied. So for example, if this was set with 1,000 nit metadata, technically speaking, you should put this on a display and none of these should flash. However, there are some displays that actually show things that are flashing. And then basically what's happening there, like we had mentioned, just a bit ago, was this is the manufacturer interpreting the metadata and basically either stripping it, manipulating it, and displaying it how they see that it needs to be fit.
There's a few other here too, and guys, this is just a handful of the test patterns that we have on the 7G, and these are of course all available on Ryan's disk and the digital files. This was another one that I always enjoy looking at, as far as seeing white level all the way up to 10,000 nits, but also seeing color detail up to that bright as well. And just on this, this is obviously not a reference screen I'm looking at. It's my laptop screen, and I'm not sure what's happening with the test pattern once it goes on the web. But what I'm seeing, just on my screen is, I've got red detail all the way up to about here, where I've got blue detail about here. Green goes up almost all the way. So if somebody's looking at this test pattern and they're seeing primary and secondary colors and white from about 100 nits to 10,000 nits, is there a specific thing we're trying to adjust here, or is this just like an evaluation type pattern?
Yeah, this is 100% evaluation. So essentially what this is doing is there's no P3 DC65s on this. This is straight BT 2020. So there's not a lot of displays that are going to be able to adhere up to that high percentage of what BT 2020 can do.
Sure.
This particular pattern and my basic setup is set to 1,000 nit. So essentially what you're doing is you would look at the 1,000 nit marker, you would see where your grayscale, if it makes it all the way up to that point, and then you'd see where all of your colors fall in between all the way down, just to kind of see where that clipping's happening. And it's not necessarily right, wrong, or indifferent or bad. This is basically just exposing how well can your display show that BT 2020 color space.
Sure, sure. Cool. So let's just take a quick look. I want to leave some time for questions at the end because we've got a couple good questions that have rolled in. I know you said you're gonna redo your website pretty soon, but if somebody wants more information about the disc and about some of the stuff you're doing, it's diversifiedvideosolutions.com. If we go through here, it shows you all the different programs and all the different things that your disc is compatible with. And here's a good question because I've gotten this in the past. If we're using something that's semi-automated like Calman, and when I say automated, I mean as far as like changing test patterns for you. If you have the disk in a player, how does that communicate with Calman to know the change of the test patterns, or is that still something that you have to do yourself manually?
It is. It's still manual, and
Okay.
some of my customers will come back and say, it's like, well, what could we do to change that? And I mean, at this point, you have a couple of different options, especially if you're looking at something that's budget friendly. You could try to utilize your laptop, which would be more of an automated setup, but
Yeah.
you would really have to confirm are those reference levels that are coming
Right.
out.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of ways to confirm that, and that's still a good option, right? You could go the test pattern generator route, if your budget allows, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at least with mine, if you're spending $35 on a disc,
Right.
you're going to be doing, it's a manual process, but you're kind of
Well,
learning and going along, and that's kind of how I explain it.
and that's okay because here's why it's okay. I'm starting to feel like the old man saying, "You kids don't know how well you have it." We used to do everything manually. Even with the old Sencor generators, we still had to change patterns manually. So when reading a grayscale, I had to go into the Sencor, go to 100, take a reading, go down to 90, take a reading, go down to 80. This is nothing new. It just
Yeah,
might be a little bit more time consuming, but I love your point is a lot of people, if they're into this kind of stuff, they're still kind of learning.
yeah,
So I always encourage people, as you're learning, do it all manually anyway. Because if you do have something automated and it doesn't work and you don't know how to do it manually, you don't know how to fix it if something breaks.
right.
So I love that. And the fact that you can still use something like Calman or Color Space and still use the test patterns. Yeah, you have to change them manually, but no big deal. But the fact that it all works together is super cool. Is there anything we could point out real quick that people, if they're looking at the website, I know you have your store, correct? And that's where the discs and the digital files are at. Am I in the right
Yeah,
ballpark here?
I
So
tell you
under the
what.
products tab.
Yep, one thing, if you could, you can click on HDR10, HLG, any one of the actual product description pages. Now, this is going to change on the website. This is something I've wanted to change for a while. I haven't done it. I still have folks reach out and say, Ryan, I'm not sure if your product's compatible with my setup. Do you have demos? And I do. I provide demos for all of them. So if you scroll
Cool.
down to the very bottom of this page, there's a link at the very, very bottom. You can scroll all the way down. Yep. So right there where it says Grayscale demo download, I
Oh, okay.
have, yep, I have it now on my new website. It's at the very top. Very accessible, very in your face.
Yeah.
But for the time being, just for folks, download our HDR10, our HLG, our Dolby Vision. I have a little. It's free. It's a little zip file with a couple of different patterns for you to try, and see if it works for you. And
Okay.
if it works, then I encourage to go to the products page and and purchase our product.
No, that's great. Now I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I want to leave a few minutes here at the end for questions because we had some excellent questions come in. Tom had another question about HDR10 plus patterns. What's the story with those?
They are coming.
Yeah.
Yep, they're definitely coming. Yep. So as a matter of fact, I don't have it on this particular laptop to actually bring it up, but my website is already built, the new one. There's just a couple of aspects of it that need to change. The HDR10 plus patterns will be a part of that package deal.
Cool.
So yeah, yep. And
Okay.
also
Cool.
one great tool I worked with, or not worked with, but I spoke with Florian. He has a
Oh,
phenomenal tool.
he's the
Yeah,
man.
yeah, he is the man. So
Yeah,
he
Florian's
has a
awesome.
phenomenal tool for confirming HDR10 plus.
Hmm.
So all of my stuff has been through that. So
Yeah.
yeah, so we definitely have some HDR10 plus patterns that are good, that are coming out.
Good, 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 good. Another question came in from Tom. Have you considered any job-specific test patterns? For example, a special test pattern for TV reviewers to identify things like dirty screen effect or motion blur. Yeah, okay, so yeah, like specifically dirty screen effect and motion blur.
Yeah, so actually, so I have a couple of those types of test patterns, especially motion blur, that are on my current set. Not anything specifically for dirty screen effect, but more to your point, I have created a couple of custom test patterns, actually quite a few test patterns for specific folks, upon call. So folks will reach out, they have a certain issue or anomaly, and it could be a manufacturer, it could be an enthusiast, an end user. I've created a couple of things, quite a few test patterns for Greg Lowen, as a matter of fact,
Yeah.
for PPA. So matter of fact, the patterns that are on the Gen 7 were some of my creations. But yeah, so more to your point, yeah, I have. I guess these things I could add, say, to my current suites. But if anybody, any customer, anyone is looking for anything in particular, I can create, custom test patterns on the fly, for any point. Yeah.
Cool, very good. A question from Sammy. Sammy is always hanging out with us. I'm happy to see his name every time he pops up because he always has great questions like this one. Have you found that with newer models from varying brands that are using new code values for patches within the grayscale? Example, the XR processor on the Sony A90J uses different code values than, say, an LG.
Yeah, that does become challenging. So when you do something where I'm creating them by hand, they do change every year. At one point, I was doing a release every year. LG, even staying within the same brand, was changing their code values per year. So that became cumbersome. Samsung, so it's not like they stick with one particular. I think their engineers go in there and say, you know what? Instead of 623, let's do 618. And for them, that's a quick code change. For me, it's a whole different pattern set.
Yeah, it's a whole new,
yeah. So what I'm going to try to do, and what I've done so far, in this new release, I'm actually releasing a new HDR10 plus update, which we haven't released one in about maybe 2 years. So we have a lot of new test patterns that are coming with that, along with the HDR10 plus flavor. HLG, not much has changed. That's basically going to stay the same. Dolby Vision, I do have Profile 5, but we are going to be releasing an 8.1 and a Profile 7 that's coming out with that. But more so to Sammy's point, we're going to try to release the most current code patterns. But I encourage any of my customers, if they reach out to me, we could work something out. I've done it so far in the past on numerous occasions where, Ryan, I love your patterns. However, I have this new display. I need these code values. And I make a set of code values, and we work out a price that works for them. Sure. And have a one-of-a-kind setup, with those code patterns.
Tom asks for some behind the scenes information. He says, I'm curious about the rooftop HDR test scene. Where did you shoot it? What did you use? And last but not least, who's the girl?
So I cannot take credit for that. So when we first sat down, I worked with a couple of different folks. All these were stock photos that were in SDR that we were trying out an algorithm to convert SDR to HDR. I would love to know who the girl is too. I don't know, but it ended up working out as a great way to tone. I believe the girl photo was actually from the folks at Black Magic.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think that was one of their SDR test patterns. And just like the restaurant scene and the other scenes, I wanted to be able to take something, and we actually nailed it. We nailed it down. I actually have an algorithm and software that I use right now to take all of these standard dynamic range patterns and bring them in. Now, you could still go into, say, like a DaVinci Resolve or anything like that and take and do an SDR to HDR conversion, manipulate. But for me, I wanted to be able to create something that could convert it. So that's where those test patterns. There's plenty more. There's also some. We did implement a couple of videos. We are going to have some more. And there's also going to be some audio being added in these next updates.
Oh, nice. Well, guys, we have maybe a couple of minutes left. So if there's any last minute questions, go ahead and send those to me now. And one more from Sammy. Oh, this is actually a great question. Have you found that any of the digital files have compatibility issues with any of the newer model TVs? Example, A90J with a USB drive displaying files. So I think he's asking about compatibility with maybe the file type or file extension. Sammy, clear that up for me if that's not right.
Yeah, so if he does respond, so we are going to offer a couple of different containers. MP4 seems to be the most compatible if it's the container. We are going to offer a MKV version. I've done that in the past, and also we've also done a TS stream, transport stream. So if it's the actual container that it's in, we are going to provide a couple of different flavors. But as far as the patterns themselves, the HDR10 has probably been the static. I have had some compatibility issues with the Dolby Vision, and this has nothing to do with Dolby Vision themselves. It's actually the player, the media player, and how it's actually reading the Profile 5. So yeah, there's a lot that's going to change, and this is the reason why with updates, one thing that that we're really pushing for now is having these new updates so we can have newer codecs utilized, and something that kind of jives more with what's current.
It sounds like specifically Sammy might be having a problem with Dolby Vision files on the USB drive in the Sony A90J. Have you come across that yet, or?
I have not, but I tell you what, that it's definitely something that if offline, if you want to reach out on the contacts page, I have access to a lot of different displays and a lot of different from different manufacturers, and definitely would be curious to see what's going on. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool. Well, guys, that's it. We're right at an hour. I usually run way over because I always do. But thank you so much, Ryan. For those of you who are listening, whether it's live or maybe the YouTube replay, let me know what you guys think. If you want to talk to Ryan more about some more test patterns and maybe even get a little more geeky and techie, let's do it. But you got to let me know. Just leave some comments. And Ryan, I'd love to have you on again. It's always fun talking to you. Nice to finally meet you virtually. We've talked on the phone quite a bit over the last few years, but I love what you're doing. I've used your disc quite a bit in the past. Thank you for making it. Any last words?
No, I appreciate the time. I love the geek out, so anytime anyone wants to come on and we can sit here and chat for hours.
Yeah, for sure.
I love it. Enthusiast at heart. So Jason,
yeah.
I truly appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. If there's any other things that you guys want to see, as far as whether it's test patterns or maybe it's HDMI troubleshooting or anything like that, I want to cater these webcasts for you guys. So I don't know what to do if you don't tell me what you want. So leave those in the comments. Feel free to email me directly, jason@murideo.com, and we'll be happy to keep scheduling these. And Ryan, I hope to have you on again pretty soon. Are you going to be doing InfoComm by chance, or staying home for that?
We'll see.
We'll see.
I was at InfoComm. I haven't been in 2 years, so we'll see.
Yeah. Cool. Cool. All right, guys. Well, thanks again, and yeah, we'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you.